12, which is burnt umber light, which is chocolate brown, yellow, and pyrrole red light, which is a bright orangey red. And I'm going to use my number 7 brush for this. So the way that we're making this into a dark orange is by adding quite a bit of brown to it. We wouldn't want to darken it using something like black, because black is going to turn it kind of green. So the way we can keep it nice and warm and dark is by adding that chocolate brown, which I'm using burnt umber light. Oh, Kathy has a good question. How do you decide whether to go from dark to light or light to dark? So Kathy, what I'll tell you is when we're doing the value study in the beginning, remember steps 1, 2, and 3, we went from light to dark. We kind of built our way up to the shadows. But then when we started the local color yesterday, which was in step 7, that's where we started painting the colors we see. Then from there on, I typically go dark to light. So this dark chocolate brown, we are dropping into the centers of our sunflowers. So you can see if you look really closely at the reference image, there's this little kind of ring of highlight around the center. And so we're using this chocolate brown to identify that. We've already kind of built up our darkest value when we put in that kind of eggplant color yesterday. So now this dark brown is kind of working like a highlight, even though it's still a very dark color. And I am using my number 7 brush. I don't remember if I said that when I first started this step. And just a reminder, I'm working on a 12 by 12 panel. Notice how I am not like painting it in as a perfect circle though. I'm letting it be kind of random, right? And down here, we don't see the ring all the way around because it's blocked by the leaf. And no water in this. So now that we are done with our value study and our washes, we don't put any water in our paint. So this is just the paint. And then I'm also using this dark brown to start building up some of the shadows on my stem. So they don't feel super brown, maybe they look a little more gray, but just like yesterday when I used the mint to build up the highlights on my stem, I can use the brown to build up the shadows. The color itself does not need to match that much. It's more about using a dark color. Linda was asking about the reference image. And yes, there is a filter on the reference image, so that's something that I like to do to kind of simplify the shapes. And so one filter that I like to use a lot is called, it's in an app called PicSart, P-I-C-S-A-R-T. And the filter I use is called the geode filter. And so I do have a tutorial inside of Fresh Paint where I show students exactly how to use that filter. But what it does is it just kind of simplifies the shapes and it brings out some more interesting colors in the reference. So friends, now I'm continuing with my dark brown and I'm putting it onto the pumpkin. So first we put it in the ring around the center of the sunflowers. Then we put it on the stem, and now we're identifying those dark shapes on the pumpkin, which we've kind of already identified because we sort of figured out where they are when we were doing our value study. So we've already built up some darkness there, and now we're just kind of shifting it into more of this orangey brown color. Yeah, I see one of the ladies from the team just posted the name of the app that I like to use, PicSart Geode Filter. So the Fresh Paint support, or the Alley K support team just posted that there. So I know there was a question, if I'm not using fluid acrylics, could I add water? And so yes, if you have like heavy body paints, then you could add a small amount of water. I just caution you not to put too much in, because it's going to make your paint like not as powerful. And so it would probably be better for you to just build up thicker texture in your paint using the thicker paint than to add too much water. You could add a little bit of medium if you wanted to avoid putting water in if you had a heavy body paint. And I know sometimes people who are new to using golden fluid acrylics have commented that they seem so runny, or they seem like kind of transparent, and that they don't cover that well. But they're actually phenomenal. But what we have to keep in mind is we built up a dark color, and so we're putting a dark on top of a dark. And so when we do that, we're able to get really good coverage because we're putting dark on top of dark. If I put this color on top of like a really light area, it wouldn't cover as well. So that's why we do this layering process of building up the darks, because it allows us to come back and have like a nice coverage. Okay, I just paused my video there so that you guys can take a screenshot. We just finished step 12, which was our darkest color in the oranges. So go ahead, grab your screenshot so you can come back to that. And then we're going to move along to step 13, which is going to be the same 3 colors. So 13 is still burnt umber light, Hansa yellow opaque, and pyrrole red light. So since it is the same 3 colors and it's not all that different, I'm just going to continue mixing it in the same mixing well. So Donna asked about slow dry medium. So we haven't used slow dry medium yet. And she said, would that be better with cheaper paints that are a bit thicker? So the purpose of slow dry medium isn't really to thin the paints, it's to slow down the drying time. So it allows you to get kind of like a softer looking brush stroke. And it's something that I didn't used to use. I just recently started incorporating it into my fresh paint lessons. And I really, really enjoyed it. It's kind of like you can just kind of throw it in wherever you feel like you want to put a softer brush stroke down. If you mix it in your paint, it will kind of help it to lay down a little softer and play with the colors next to it a little more nicely. It gives you a few extra moments of wetness in the paint. And so if you don't have matte medium, whenever I do suggest medium, you could also be using slow dry medium, that's fine. And yes, we have both matte medium and slow dry medium in our paint kits. Okay, so I'm taking this color in 13, and you see how we're starting to build out the shadows that are not quite as dark as right here. So if you look at like this section of the pumpkin, see how it's dark closest to the line, and then it kind of dissolves out towards a bright edge, right? Same thing over here. It's dark right at the edge, and then it kind of dissolves out to the left. And yes, I am still using my number 7 brush. Do you see how I'm kind of wrapping my brush strokes around the pumpkin? So I'm thinking about like the volume of this form and how it's something three-dimensional that we're representing. So you don't really see me kind of going every which direction with my brush strokes. I'm laying them down almost as though I'm like imagining this is a sculpture of a pumpkin, and I'm putting the strokes down the sculpture of the pumpkin. Oh, Bonnie has a good question. She said she just joined Fresh Paint as a monthly member. Does her month begin today or October 1st? So your membership begins immediately. You don't have to wait. We don't go by the calendar month. It just means, so today is the 27th. It means your membership renews every month on the 27th. And I think maybe that varies a little bit if it's like a, leap year or like something like that. But in general, it's that same day of the month. So you get instant access to everything when you sign up. Okay, so now we're using the same color in 13 that we used to start building out those shadows on the pumpkin. And now we're starting to build out some shadows on our sunflowers. So the yellow of the sunflower petals is darker, kind of right towards the center because it's more in shadow, and then it gets brighter at the tips because we have some sunlight that's like passing through those petals. And then notice how this sunflower has like some petals that are overlapping each other, right? So like this one, they sort of are all coming out pretty evenly from the center, but this one, not so much. Some of these petals are kind of coming out straight at us. That's something we call foreshortening. Now, if you've never heard that before and it's confusing, don't worry, but it's a little art term, and it means when something's coming out straight at you, like if you look at my hand right now, you see how it looks really short? It's because it's coming right out at you. When I turn it to the side, it looks longer because it's going the other direction. When it's going this way, it's called foreshortening. So our petals are doing the same thing on that portion of the sunflower. Oh, some questions about the way that the membership works. So it says, if I don't renew for the next month. So it will automatically renew. You don't need to do anything if you decide to join. And if you do join and you decide it's just not for you, we will be sad, but you can certainly cancel before your next payment comes out. And yeah, as Abby mentioned, so our last day to sign up for Fresh Paint will be September 30th, which is Monday. Okay, so we just finished step 13. Go ahead, grab a screenshot. It's starting to look a little bit more like a pumpkin, but in the next two steps, I promise you, it's going to really start to come together. So grab your screenshots, and we are going to move on to 14. And clean off your brush right now because we have a new recipe for 14, and so we're going to mix that up in a new spot on our palette. So the recipe for 14 does not have burnt umber light in it. It only has Hansa Yellow Opaque, Pyrrole Red Light, and Titanium White. And so I'm still going to use my number 7 brush, but you'll notice here how as our color gets lighter, it gets less dull, it gets more saturated. So that's why step 14 does not have any burnt umber light in it. It's just the yellow, the red, and the white. And it's just a small amount of white. It's definitely more of the yellow and red. If you put too much white in, it's going to end up looking kind of chalky. So you can lighten orange two ways. You can lighten orange by adding white, or you can lighten orange by adding yellow. If you do just white, it turns into like more of a peach. In this color, if you have a different yellow, if you don't have the golden yellow that I have, hence the yellow opaque, you may need to use a little bit more yellow to get it to cover, or you might need to just do a second pass of this color to get it to cover on top of the purple that we've already put down. So this is where it's going to start looking like a pumpkin. I know some of you were doubtful yesterday. I saw a few of you posting your paintings and you're like, well, this is a hot mess. Maybe this isn't for me. And I was thinking, no, this is supposed to be ugly right now. Mine's ugly too right now. We have to finish it and then it's going to come together. And you might remember from yesterday, I gave the little tip that when you're following along on the reference, if you are getting a little bit lost, like you're like, okay, here's one dark section, here's another dark section, then there's this dark section, don't forget, hold your finger right on that spot on the reference and then go find it on your painting. Now, one more thing I don't think I mentioned yet today, and I really want to make sure you make note of this. I am leaving little bits of purple showing between my brush strokes. Do you see that? You see how I'm intentionally leaving these little chunks of purple? Do that. It might seem uncomfortable. It might seem like, why are we doing this? But in the end, those little chunks of purple are going to play really nicely with this bright orange, and they're just going to look fun together. So trust me on this. Leave some little chunks of purple. Yeah, and I repeat a lot, like in our fresh paint lessons, even though we have people that have been in the membership for years and they've watched so many lessons, I still repeat, I think during every lesson, remember to leave some of that underpainting, remember to leave some of the purple, because I know that it's so easy to just start slapping paint down and pretty soon you've covered up all of that fun color that you've laid down earlier. So I consistently remind people to make sure they leave a little bit, because you can always cover up more later. If you decide, oh, I left way too much purple, looks ridiculous, it's a purple pumpkin, then you can add more orange. But it's hard to bring that purple back if you covered it all up. So just give it a try. Now, we talked about slow dry medium earlier. This would be a place where you could try putting a little bit of slow dry medium into your mixture. I know I don't have it written down on the recipe chart, but if you put a tiny bit in, what would happen is it would kind of make where this color meets this color, it would soften it a little bit, like at the end of your brush stroke, and that is kind of nice. So maybe if you have some slow dry, and you want to experiment with it, just try dabbing a little bit into your orange color and see what it does. It's not a dramatic change, but it's something that you just kind of get more familiar with the more you play around with using the slow dry medium. Rich, yes, golden retarder is the same thing as slow dry medium, yeah. I know we have some questions about our small sample size paint kits. They will be back in stock mid-October. We can't say exactly until we get them at the shop, but that is what they have told us. And we do have the regular size golden paint kits available. And I will just tell you guys, we have them 40% off through today, and we're not allowed to have them 40% off after that because Golden's really strict about what you can charge for their paint. So if anybody's thinking about going with the regular size kit, we still have some of those left on the site, and you can grab those, and they are currently marked 40% off. You don't need a code or anything. I see Marie Ann said, love the undercolors peeking through. Yeah, it's really fun. And you know what's interesting is when you squint, it's like the value of this purple, that means how light or dark it is, it's the same as the value of the orange. So they actually just kind of play together and they kind of vibrate, and it's just interesting. Okay, so now we're still working with step 14, and we're starting to build out some of that same color on our sunflowers. And I'm not covering up all of the darker color we put down. I'm kind of like cutting into it with this new lighter color. So that's starting to sort of identify where the petals are coming out from the center. Do you see how I'm kind of making like a triangular shape there? Yeah, Denise said when you added the lighter orange, all of a sudden the pumpkin looks dimensional. Well, guess what? Wait till we go even a little lighter, because we're going to brighten these highlights considerably more, but we are starting to inch our way out of the messy middle, also known as the ugly teenager stage. Sorry, teenagers. They're not ugly, right? But, you know, they're going through a little transition, just like our painting. It's like anything beautiful in life. It has to go through a little bit of awkwardness. So that's where we were. We're starting to come out of it now. I had an awkward stage for sure. Mine lasted, I think, from like 5th grade until like 9th grade, I think. Maybe longer, I don't know. It was when I figured out how to tame my curly hair that made a big difference. So I'm leaving a bit more of that darker orange on this sunflower, because if you look, there's more darkness on these, right? There's more light hitting the petals on this flower than there is on this one. This is more in shadow. Oh, you guys, I see people saying, I'm still in the awkward stage. No, you're not. Okay, so there we are. That was step 14. Go ahead and grab a screenshot. So as I mentioned, we are still going to get considerably lighter. So 15 is the same recipe But we're taking it up a notch. We're going to be brightening it just a little bit more. So there's not a huge jump between 14 and 15, but you can see there's a little bit. It looks like there's definitely more yellow in step 15. Let me see if I also added a little more white. Yeah, I added a little more white, but I'm going to add a lot more yellow. Oh, Madhu said, is fresh paint connected with a place called Chattanooga in the U.S.? So maybe when you Googled fresh paint, you saw that. That's where I am located. So I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And yeah, and then of course, fresh paint is the name of my program. So that's probably why you saw that. Okay, so now we are building up our highlights. We're pushing them even brighter. So when we look at the reference image, we can see, like, look where my white arrow is. It gets pretty bright right here. Now, this bright highlight doesn't show up down here, right? Like, this is not as bright. But up at the top and towards the left, that's where we find it the brightest. And as we're coming in with this brighter orange, we also have to be really intentional that we don't cover up all those little spaces of purple that we left earlier. So I'm kind of like strategically leaving those little bits of purple. Mandala was saying that the 40% off isn't showing on the site for the paint. So actually, I just had a conversation with the team about this, and so it is 40% off of MSRP. We had kind of mistakenly put the original price as what we typically sell it at, which we normally are allowed to sell it at 30% off. So our kits will always be 30% off because that's the lowest that they let us sell them. But twice a year, they let us discount it further to 40% off. So we actually, I think we're going to be clarifying that on the site, so that makes a little more sense. But yeah, it is marked to 40% off. So this is a good time to squint and look at your painting and see just how far it's come, because it's really starting to take shape. And if you're too close to it, if you haven't gotten away from your painting at all, you don't realize how it's come together. And sometimes you just need to step away, get like 6 feet away or across the room. And that's when you can kind of be like, oh yeah, it looks like a 3-dimensional pumpkin. It's starting to happen. Brush size, yes, I'm still using a number 7. Thanks for remembering to ask me. So what we are doing right now is something called optical blending. And here's what that means. Do you see how our pumpkin, like, let's just look at this section of the pumpkin right here. And it goes from a light section over to a dark section. Now, when we step back, this kind of turns into like a soft gradient, right? From light over to dark. But we haven't mushed any of the colors together. And so what it means is we're letting our eyes do the blending. So that's what we're creating when we are laying down these different steps from dark to light. Now I'm still using that bright orange, and I'm just plopping it right onto my stem as well, letting it kind of play with the green. It's all good. Okay, so we just finished step 15. Grab a screenshot. This is how the painting looks after step 15. Now 16 is really going to take it up another notch brighter. Look at how bright we get in 16. So we're going to be adding quite a bit of white to our recipe. So our recipe for 16 is still Hansa yellow opaque, Pyrrole red light, and white, but now it has a lot of white. And I'm still using my number 7 brush. So this looks really bright, right? And at first it might feel a little uncomfortable, like, oh, I went too bright. But the thing is, if you look really closely at just this section, like look right where my arrow is and compare it to the brightness of the white arrow, it's a really bright color. So part of creating these really like bold, dramatic paintings is not being afraid to show high contrast. And this pumpkin does have high contrast. So it goes from a very dark, brownish orange color to this like almost white peach. Nancy asked what I call this impressionist painting. Yeah, it is inspired by Impressionism. I kind of call my style modern Impressionism because of the bold colors that I use. I think typically traditional Impressionism is more pastels a little bit. But, it is what it is. Like, we all just kind of form our own signature style, and it just kind of turns into what feels good. All right, so we just finished 16, and we're going to move along. So I just did these pale highlights in 16. Now we're switching over to a color that is quite similar to 15, right? But it's got more yellow in it. And we're going to use 17 to start building out the yellows in our sunflower petals. So our recipe for 17 is still Hansa yellow opaque, Pyrrole red light, titanium white, but I'm moving to a new spot on my palette because this color is so yellow. It's going to be mostly yellow with just a little speck of white and a little speck of red. Addie said, does slow dry medium also thin the paint some? It does a little bit, but its main purpose is slowing down the drying time. Yeah, I see Silvana just answered that. So do you see how this color that we're dropping in on the petals of sunflowers, this feels more yellowy, it feels more golden than what we were building up over on the pumpkin. It's made with the same colors, but because we used more yellow in it, it has a little bit of a different shift. And just like when we were layering our color on the pumpkin, I want you to think about not covering up all of the purple on your sunflowers either. Be intentional about leaving some bits of it kind of showing through between the individual petals, or maybe leave some little bits of it showing around the very tips of the petals, but really be intentional about it. And yes, I am still using my number 7 brush, although on the next step, I'm going to switch down to a number 5. We're getting close. This is exciting. Another thing to think about as you drop in your petals on your sunflower, try not to make them all look exactly the same. So our brains have this weird tendency to start getting robotic when we start doing things like petals, and we start making like dot, 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 and then they're all like the same size and the same shape. And in reality, that's not the way natural things are usually, right? So like the petals on these sunflowers are kind of overlapping each other in some places, and some stick out further than others, and some, are more rounded and some are more pointy. So really think about changing things up and making sure that you don't get into that pattern system where you're going dot, 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 dot. And you almost have to tell yourself not to. Remember earlier when I mentioned that we're going to leave more shadow on this sunflower? Remember that. So we put more of these highlights in on this one. But now as we come around and we start putting the highlights on this one, we're not going to do as many. We're going to just kind of catch the tips just a little bit. It's not going to be as much coverage with these highlights. See, Renee said it's so pretty. It's starting to get there, Renee. Okay, so that was step 17. So for 18, we are going to make a lighter yellow for a brighter highlight on our sunflowers. So do you notice a system where we kind of start with the darks, we go mid-tone, lighter, 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 brightest. So we did that with the pumpkins, we did that with the leaves, and now we're going to do that with the sunflower petals. So now we're putting in that bright glowing yellow that we have in step 18. Grab a screenshot real quick if you haven't already. And so 18 is the same recipe. It's still pyrrole red light, fancy yellow, opaque, and white, but now it's mostly like a bright yellow. It's going to have very little of the red in there. So you see how I'm adding a ton more yellow to it and just a little more white. And as I mentioned, now I have switched down to a number 5 brush, because this color is going to go in some smaller spaces.
Oh, okay, we're confused. Okay. Come on, everybody.
I see Darla just came in with some great advice, something I tell fresh painters often. She said to another student who felt that theirs looked ugly still, she said, give it overnight. The paint fairies visit, and you won't believe how good it looks the next day. It's totally true, Darla. I tell the fresh painters this all the time. We call them paint fairies, I call them the magic elves, but sometimes you just need to get away from it and come back the next day and you see it with fresh eyes and it comes together. It is amazing, and I'm not making that up. It's really true. I mean, of course, they're not really fairies. That's not part of the Fresh Paint membership, but in our brains, that's how it works. So look how bright we're getting now. We can get it to this bright yellow because we've built it up and we're layering and layering and pushing and pushing.
Okay, so apparently second grade is out there, isn't right now, and there's not really any birds.
Gino said, I thought the same thing when I saw mine this morning. See, just had to give it time. That was another reason why we didn't want to have this lesson be like one long 2-hour lesson, because especially when you're learning, it's better to break it up, give it a little bit of time, but come back the next day. Don't set it aside for a month or a year. Come back the next day and finish. Addie said, no fairies, disappointing. I mean, sorry, we'd have to probably charge more than $45 a month if we were going to work that out. Sorry. It's fun when we get to this stage of adding the like sparkly bright colors, because we've done all the work. You know, we've spent time painting in all those shadows that didn't feel as rewarding, didn't feel as beautiful, but because we did that, now we can come back with this bright yellow in step 18 and just put a few little touches of it, and it just makes it pop. Okay, so that was step 18. We just have a few steps left. We're going to put some additional color on our stems now, and we're going to just finish it up. So grab a screenshot after step 18. Okay, so 19, new recipe. It's going to be this kind of tan color. Remember when we did our color mixing maps, we made it using burnt umber light, a little bit of Hansa yellow opaque, and titanium white. And I'm going to use my number 5 brush for this. Melanie said, I love the fact that we can create such a beautiful work in such a short time. Isn't that fun? I am like all about, you know, the quick rewards. Not that I don't have patience, but I just think like I don't want to spend 50 hours on a painting. I want to make something quick that I love and then make another thing. And I think that's easier for you as you learn too. Because if a painting takes forever, you're just not going to finish it. And we need that surge of feeling good about what we did in a short amount of time in order to keep going. But, you know, just a reminder as well, if you feel like the lesson is going fast, which I know it does, you have the recording of this, and all of our fresh paint lessons, you always have unlimited access to all the recordings whenever you're a member. So most people end up painting to the recordings. Now I'm using that same tan to put this little chunk of negative space in here. So this is like whatever the pumpkin's sitting on. We just put that in right there. But notice how I still left some of the pink. I didn't completely fill in the pink. I wanted to leave that little sparkle of pink there. Okay, so 19 was a quick step. That was it. Go ahead and take a screenshot of 19. And then 20 is going to be same 3 colors, just a little bit lighter. So 20, again, is burnt umber light, just a little bit of Hansa yellow opaque, and titanium white. Yes, I see see there was a question, if we sign up for fresh paint today, is there a bonus? So we're doing something really special today. I'm going to be sharing it with you very soon. Yeah, it's different, it's really special and exciting, so I'm going to share it with you when we get through the next couple of steps for those of you that end up deciding to come join us today. Okay, so this lighter color in 20, I decided to layer it on top of what I put down in the previous step because I wanted it to separate the surface that the pumpkin is sitting on. I wanted it to separate it from the pumpkin a little more, so we created a little more contrast there. And now we're coming back with that bright color, and remember we put like mint down on top of the stem before? We're going to be covering a little bit of that up with this color, but not all of it. I'm still leaving some little residue of that mint showing. And I'm using my number 5 brush, but if you're having trouble like getting into the tighter spaces, you could go down to a number 3. But of course, it's also all dependent on what size panel you're using as well. So also think about making these ridges, these highlights on the stem. Make sure they're not perfect. Remember just how I said, make sure that your petals aren't evenly spaced and the same size and perfect. Same thing with those ridges. They're not all going to be the same. Okay, 20 is done. Go ahead, grab a screenshot. Our next step, remember from the color mixing map, I said step 21 is like free space. You don't have to mix it. It's just straight white paint. So that's what we're going to do next.
Thank you.
And I'm switching down to my number 3 brush now. So this color in 21 is only going into a few little tight spaces. And so we are going to switch down to a smaller brush. Tracy asked, do you recommend painting on an easel? I do, Tracy, and I'll say if you don't have like a big full-size easel, I know not everybody has space for one of those or is ready to invest in one of those, but you can get a tabletop easel on Amazon for like $5. And I think it's so helpful to have your painting vertical versus laying flat. It just makes it easier to see everything. So we're putting this brightest white in at the very top of the stem where we can see that it's just really glowing. I always like to save my brightest whites until the very end, and then I can determine like, okay, where is this painting really, really glowing? And that's where I'm going to put it in. Yeah, I see, let's see, Jeanette, oops, sorry, my arrow went big there, sorry about that. I was trying to scroll and see a comment. I think it was Jeanette said she has a tabletop easel, it makes all the difference, yeah. And Lisa said your neck will thank you. Yeah, so also not leaning out over the tabletop, but having it up in front of you is also good for your neck, good for your back, all that stuff. So we're also putting a few little sparkles of this brightest white at the very top of the pumpkin, but not everywhere, just at the very top. Oh, we're so close. Okay, we have 2 colors left. Grab your screenshot after 21. And we're going to come in and just pop out our greens a little bit brighter in 22. So we're going to move on. 22 is going to be phthalo green, Hansa yellow opaque, and white. And I'm using a number 5 brush for this. Make sure your brush is really clean now because we want the color for 22 to be like this really bright lime green. And remember from our color mixing map, phthalo green is crazy strong, so you don't need hardly any of it. You just barely touch the edge of your brush to the phthalo green, and it will make this bright lime green. Oh, Cynthia said she's been painting flat, wondered about the easel. So, you know, another thing you can do if you don't have an easel is just get a stack of books and tilt your whatever surface you're working on up against the stack of books. I have done that plenty of times. Just don't get paint all over your books, right? Maybe put a plastic bag over them or something. So we're just dropping in a little extra sparkle. We did this same sort of technique with the daisy, where we just kind of towards the end made our greens vibrate a little bit. I'm not putting this lime green everywhere though. I'm not putting it on top of our minty greens. We want those to stay minty. So we have like 2 different versions of bright green. We have the bright minty green and we have the bright lime green. Okay, Monica said she uses canned goods for her easel. Yeah, you know, whatever works. And no, there's no medium in here because we really want this green in the final stages to pop. Now, of course, I said I wasn't putting it on top of the mint, but then I did put a little bit right there. One little caution thing about working on a tabletop easel though is don't forget to get up and get away from the table sometimes. Stand up and walk away. It's really key. If you've been sitting for your entire painting, it's time to, you know, check it out from across the room. Yeah, Debbie found one on Amazon for $5. Good job, Debbie. Okay, so there we go. You guys, we have 1 color left. We are so close to the end of Paint Week paintings. And so we just finished 22. Grab a screenshot. Now 23 is going to be our very lightest yellow. So we just did our very lightest green. Now we're going to do our very lightest yellow. And so that yellow is made from Pyrrole Red Light, Hansa Yellow Opaque, and white. But barely any Pyrrole Red Light. It's going to be mostly white with a little bit of yellow and even less red. Another thing I will mention is make sure your brush is completely clean. Because if you have any green on your brush, it's going to be really difficult to get this yellow to be super, super bright. So you can see I'm going to a clean spot on my palette. I just squirted out some clean white because I don't want my white to be contaminated with green. And I'm going to make the brightest yellow I can make. And I'm using my number 3 brush, so that's the smallest of the flats that I have used so far. Diane said, I will have to do monthly as I don't want it to end. We don't want it to end for you either, Diane. We would love to have you come join us. And Sherry said, you're hooked. Yep. Julie, good question. Why is red in this recipe? So what the red does is it warms up our yellow just the tiniest little bit. So rather than making it a complete lemon yellow, it makes it into like a buttercream frosting yellow. So you can tell the difference. Like a lemon yellow leans more into the greens, whereas like buttercream frosting goes a little bit more to the oranges. So that's why there's just a teeny speck of red in there. And so this is my brightest yellow, and I'm not putting it on every petal. Did you guys hear that? This is important. Somebody say it out loud. I'm not going to put this on every petal. It's so tempting when you get to these final sparkle phases to be like, this looks good, I should put it everywhere. And then you put it on every petal, and then it's not as impactful anymore. It's like sprinkles. You can only do so much. Okay, Renee said back, not on every petal. Good remembering. And also don't make it the same size on every petal that you do put it on. Let these be random. Little goes a long way, yep. Okay, that was our last step in the pumpkin with sunflowers painting. Here is how the completed painting looks. You guys also have a download of the completed painting that you can download as well to your device, so you can keep that. But wow, thanks for hanging out with me through that whole piece. I am so excited to see yours. Make sure you post them in the group. And if it's okay for me to share them on my Instagram stories, I would love to do that. So when you post it, just do #share in the description. Make sure you do it that exactly, #share with no spaces, and then my team knows it's okay for us to grab a screenshot of that and share it. Okay, so I mentioned to you all during the live stream that we are doing something very special today. So throughout the week, we have been giving away bonuses. When people enroll in Fresh Paint, they get a special bonus. And this is our second year doing Paint Week. Last year was the first. And last year, I had decided halfway through the week, or maybe towards the beginning, I don't remember, that we had such an explosive response to Paint Week, to Fresh Paint, that I wanted to do something good in the world from what we are putting together here. So what we are going to do this year, same as last year, is every enrollment that happens today, Friday, September 27th, we are donating 100% of your Fresh Paint enrollment to an organization that is near and dear to my heart. It's called Building Hope in Haiti. It is a nonprofit that my aunt and my cousin